All right, so here's our presentation for the sport tourism issue, and the issue that we decided to present on is the negative environmental impacts of sport tourism. My name's Johnny.
I'm Scott.
And I'm Amber.
Now to get into a general overview and explanation of our sport tourism issue. So the environment is a key element of sport tourism, and environmental impact is a main contributor to visitors' perception of the area that they visited for a sport tourism event. Um, we also learned about through our readings in this course that there are three major impact areas of sport tourism on the environment. The first one being both air and noise pollution. People traveling into an event are going to be using all different kinds of transportation like planes, automobiles, trains, etc., that contribute to air pollution. There's also a large increase in noise pollution comes along with it, with people cheering in the crowd. Just the general increase in population will lead to noise pollution increases as well. There's also natural resources depletion. When people come into an environment for a sporting event, they use up a lot of um, oil, gas that contributes to the carbon footprint. They're consuming a lot of water and food, and other things are just contributing to the depletion of that area's natural resources. The third and final impact area is just the physical impact on the environment. When people are coming in large numbers to an environment, they'll be contributing to damage to the physical environment, whether that's damaging trees, grass, water by the increase in foot traffic and automobile traffic. To if there's a race that's being taking place on the beach, there can be damage to that environment, and so on.
And then going on off that, deforestation is another aspect of this. Whether it be a mountain bike race, that's another sport tourism event that could be taking place. Also, habitat loss, and that obviously puts immediate pressure on wildlife that is living in those places at the current time. So both of those things are negatively in the conversation with deforestation.
All right. And then the main concerns with like the Super Bowl in Minneapolis would be the gray water. This would be from all the people staying in hotels. Staying in the hotels can reuse the towels or not wash the bedding all the time to save the water. Second would be the noise pollution. This would be coming from the stadium, and then all the activities that are going around the like the cities. This would be going on for 10 days straight, which would be also during the week, which might make the residents not happy, especially during the week since it is a work week and people still have to get up and go to work. And then also with all the garbage being collected around the area, people might just drop it on the ground and leave it there, which is obviously leaving the carbon footprint and all that kind of stuff as well.
And next, we're going to look at why we feel that sport tourism has a negative impact on the environment and why this is such a problem or a challenge for sport managers, sport tourism managers. So we know that damage to the environment is kind of an unavoidable consequence for sport tourism. There's a lot of infrastructure that goes into creating a sport tourism event that has an impact on the environment. The increase in tourists to the area will always contribute to a higher carbon footprint and other kinds of environmental issues. But it is something that is incredibly important for sport tourism managers to manage and try to minimize for the sake of the community that they're having the event in. Oftentimes, major sporting events are going to have environmental concerns before the event starts, during the event, while it's taking place, that can affect how the event goes, and then after the event, what all the increase in tourists and pollution and stuff can cause after the event is already concluded. A big example of this was talked about before both the Olympics in Beijing and Rio. We saw that air pollution, particularly in Beijing, was a huge concern going into the event. It impacted both the athletes and fans while they were there, and it was a big thing that needed to be addressed after the Olympics left. And then in Rio, there was major problems with the water that people were concerned about before. There were some illnesses and effects during the Olympics, and it was something that was even worse afterwards and needed to be cleaned up.
And then another thing would be the economic impact. This is being a primary focus of sporting events. This is a problem because they think more about tourism and then gaining it more than the damages to the environment and the surrounding communities.
And as far as a Super Bowl specific issue, we think it is one of the largest annual sporting events in the U.S. On an annual basis. So obviously, on average, it's about 78,000 people are going to be brought in for the Super Bowl, whether that's for the events prior, during, or even a little bit after. People just don't realize how they can actually affect the environment, whether it's gray water as far as in hotels, leaving trash laying around. So that just makes it even more important for us as volunteers, interns, and workers. Everyone should be constantly doing the best they can to protect the environment, and making sure that everyone knows the effect that they can have, essentially.
All right, so some examples of this issue would be like the Pan American Games in Rio. The Pan American Games were the most expensive games in the history. Planners failed to build facilities for public use for the future, and then many of these were left empty as soon as the games were ended. And then in order to create new stadiums, many residents had to move from their homes, and this violated city, federal, and international housing rights. And then with that, this leads right into the Rio Olympics.
So a few examples from the Rio Olympics. The Guanabara Bay was actually filled with trash before, when they were putting the Olympic bid in place. The Olympic Committee was aware of this, so Rio promised that they would have it cleaned, but actually they didn't, because a year and a half later the bay is still filled with trash, and it still isn't cleaned up. It's still a problem. So like Scott mentioned before, there's environmental impacts before, during, and after the event. One more example of that is Rio actually had two golf courses that they could have used when they brought back golf for the first time in 112 years to the Olympics. But they decided to build a new golf course, which essentially destroyed part of the Atlantic forest, which is a part of their national heritage in Rio. Was from a quote I read.
And then when we're talking about a major event like the Super Bowl, you can have many environmental impacts that are expected to be significant. Came across an article from the Christian Science Monitor that stated that in 2012, the Super Bowl game in Indianapolis used around 15,000 megawatt hours of electricity. The next year's Super Bowl in New Orleans Superdome pumped out 3.8 million pounds of carbon dioxide, even though the power went out in the middle of the game. And that's not even accounting for the jet fuel and gasoline guzzled to get players, media, and countless fans into the event. And then another thing to consider with having a Super Bowl game in Minnesota in the middle of February is, there's going to be a lot of people and fans in town who aren't necessarily used to the Minnesota winters, so there's going to need to be a lot of heating and snow removal costs that is going to have an effect on the environment for this particular event. But there's also, in addition to the expected impacts, there can be unexpected impacts of an event, such as we see with the design of the US Bank Stadium with all those big, beautiful windows. It has contributed to reportedly killing up to 500 birds a year. So on top of everything you have to worry about, with expected increase in, pollution, you can have other impacts that are significant to the environment that you may never have even considered.
So now looking at some of the strategies for the future, one of the biggest one is just having communication between the host cities as well as the tourists that are coming in from all over the world. People just don't realize how much of a negative impact they could have on a city by not respecting the environment. I think a lot of people probably have the attitude of, I don't live here, so why does it really matter what I do? So we can just look at increasing green tourism and looking to enforce things like littering more heavily as well.
And then the NFL is using a lot of strategies. They recognize the negative environmental impact that the Super Bowl can have for its host cities, and they've been using strategies in the past couple years that have tried to make things a little bit better than that. And I was able to find an article that outlined 6 strategies that the 2016 Super Bowl in San Francisco used and that they will continue to use in the future, which includes raising a record amount of funds for charities that are their goal is to help the environment, building more environmentally friendly stadiums. So Levi Stadium in San Francisco had high environmental standards, as well as US Bank Stadium, where it's taking place this year. They've also partnered with sustainability companies and contracted with them to make sure that they're using all the strategies, the most up-to-date strategies there. Eco-friendly transportation for players, media, and fans is a big part of reducing environmental impact, as well as food recovery programs and just fans doing what they need to do and playing their part and making sure that they're not affecting the environment more than they need to.
All right, and then with US Bank Stadium, some strategies they use: the Vikings, MSFA, and an architect from HKS aim to get LEED certification. LEED stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. The purpose of this is to shed snow off the roof efficiently into a giant snow gutter near the roof line that features a heating system to direct the melted snow through the stadium's storm water control system. The roof's ability to shed snow quickly enabled designers to utilize one central ridge, truss, and lessen the carbon footprint of the building by reducing the needed structural steel by an estimated 2,000 tons. And then with energy conservation, the Metrodome used 104 kilo British thermal units per square foot, but the US Bank Stadium only uses 92. With that, the venue's advanced air conditioning units and then improved ventilation and high efficiency monitors help keep that all down. So.
All right, and that's what we have for our presentation, and here are our references.